This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
The opinions on this program are those of the program host and guest and not necessarily those of WPSL. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. Legal questions? Ask a lawyer. Give us a call at 340-1590, 340-1590 here at the studios of WPSL. And Ask a Lawyer with your host, attorney Stuart M. Address.
Well, that's a pretty important date, actually.
Why?
Because it's the end of my second year here.
Whoa! All right, congratulations.
Yep, next week is the beginning of year 3.
All right.
Seems like I've been here for 50 years.
We'll have to bring in a Corona next week.
Corona.
Oh.
I mean, there's no cake this week? I'm shocked. Anyway, well, now not only are we here on WPSL, but we're simulcast on WSTU, 1450 AM in Stuart, where my office is, so that's pretty good. And before I go into a little bit of fun, I thought I would just say a couple words about these 2 years. First, I would like to believe that experience has led to the show and myself being a little bit more improved. I certainly came in here as a neophyte in radio, but I must say I enjoy it. I'd also like to think that you folks are enjoying the show more often. But let's be honest. Why did I start doing the show? Well, it's like any recipe for anything else. It's, 2 parts this, 3 parts that. One part is, it was marketing. Come on, let's be upfront. I want you to hear me. I want you to call my office. I want to get more cases. My goodness, what the heck? A modest lawyer?
I think it's called survival.
Call your family and friends. Call your enemies too. But no, that was certainly a part of it. It's marketing, it's advertising. A second part of it was honestly trying to give back to the community and answering some questions from, people who may have been sued or may be thinking of suing somebody, and trying to give some good advice where I can. And I discovered a third part, maybe about 6 months into the first year. And that's that, oh my goodness, having a radio show means I have a platform. I can scream from my soapbox. I can talk about things that are important to me. And I must admit, I have utilized that soapbox on more than several occasions, particularly through this long national nightmare, whichever side you may be on. But anyway, enough about that. I am happy that we have done this for 2 years. I enjoy it more and more. I have some fun with it. I hope you folks that are listening enjoy the stories, get some information. Those of you who call with questions, hopefully I'm able to answer them reasonably well. And of course, that means give us a call at 772-340-1590. That is 772-340-1590.
I was in Miami doing a ball game the other day.
And you didn't invite me.
And the athletic director said that she was listening. And she said she was listening in her office and fell over laughing with the jokes. So you never know.
We have a few more today before we perhaps go into the stuff that I've been trying to get into. I'm told that I look like I'm in Hawaii. I wish I were, but I don't think WPSL has the budget to send me there.
Well, it would probably be one way.
I can do a live broadcast on remote from an acting volcano. Talk about legal liability. Who can you sue? All right, so you all like some jokes. Here's some jokes. Given what's going on right now in the country, let's do some Senate jokes. A few of them. Okay? A member of the Senate, known for his hot temper, explodes one day in mid-session and begins to shout, "Half of this Senate is made up of cowards and corrupt politicians." All the other senators demand that the angry senator withdraw his statement or be removed for the remainder of the session. After a moment to think, the angry senator apologizes. "I'm sorry," he says. "What I meant to say was, half of this Senate is not made up of cowards and corrupt politicians."
Yes?
Okay.
Oh.
That's where you needed the ba-dum-bum.
Yeah, really. Oh, man.
Okay.
Yep.
Two young boys are talking before school. "My uncle ran for Senate last year." The first boy says to his classmate. "Really?" the second boy asks. "What does he do now?" "Nothing," the first boy explains. "He got elected."
Yes. Well, that's the rap on senators. They don't do anything.
Especially right now. All right. A small boy parks his bike near the Senate and walks on in. A policeman stops him and asks, "Why did you park your bike here? Don't you know about this road? Many important politicians, cabinet members, even the president and other such politicians pass through here," the guard says. The boy replied innocently, "Don't worry, I've locked up my bike."
That's classic. Yes.
Not only do we have lawyer jokes, we got politician jokes. All right, just a few more. An American and a Russian, das Vidanya, are talking. The American says to the Russian, "I feel bad for you folks. You don't have any freedom. In my country, I can march right up to the White House, walk right into the Oval Office, pound my fist on the president's desk, and say, 'Mr. President, I don't like the way you're running the United States.'" The Russian says, "I can do that too." "You can?" replies the American. "Sure I can. I can march right up to the Senate building, walk right into the presidential cabinet, pound my fist on the president's desk, and say, 'Mr. President, I don't like the way you're running the United States.'" Putin responds. Putin responds.
Oh.
"Don't blame me, blame Trump."
I knew that's where it was going. Yeah.
All right. A U.S. senator is running late to an important Senate meeting. He arrives 15 minutes late and enters to see each seat filled, with the exception of his own. And Senator McConnell, the majority leader, is standing in the middle of the room giving a speech. He manages to stealthily make his way to his seat without causing too much of a commotion, and leans over to the senator next to him, asking in a hushed tone, "Hey, what's McConnell talking about?" The other senator simply shrugs and whispers back, "I don't know. He hasn't received his instructions from Trump yet."
Oh. Yep.
I think we got one more of these jokes. President Trump decided to play Mario Kart with his cabinet. That's a game, folks, in case you're older. He thought that this would be a good bonding exercise with his staff, so he bought a Wii and ordered his whole office to come into the Oval Office. "Sweet," says Vice President Mike Pence. "I'm Mario. This is awesome." "I'm Bowser," explained Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. He's not the Secretary of State anymore.
I know.
This
He's
is an
long
old
gone.
joke.
He's about 6 or 7 ago.
So Mike Pompeo.
Yeah, there you go.
But Trump just groaned. "What's wrong, Mr. President?" Pence asked. "These gosh darn Democrats are spreading their liberal propaganda into jokes," Trump moaned. "What do you mean, sir?" "I'm Peach." Now,
Okay.
it has been said, and I have agreed, almost universally, and still do almost universally, that the Senate is the greatest deliberative body in the world. It has a prestige, it has a well-earned reputation, and for the most part in our history, the Senate has operated the way the framers intended. The House is the people's house. It is oftentimes raucous and divisive, and legislation sometimes comes out of it that is a little bit uneven. But then it gets to the Senate, and the Senate is supposed to reflect more soberly on such legislation. They are supposed to work with each other, negotiate, come to a better version of a bill that has been presented to it by the House, and then send it back to the House, encouraging the House to think more clearly and accept most of the Senate modifications, and so that ultimately they pass the same bill, and that's the way it becomes a law in case any of you never watched Schoolhouse Rock, like I did when I was a kid. Okay? And that is the reputation of our Senate. And that is the reputation, I think, of our Senate, for the most part, throughout the world. That it is capable of working together, disregarding party, particularly on the important issues of the day, and tries to seriously reflect the essence of our democracy.
You're too old.
So where am I going with that? Here's just a few more little comments about the Senate being the greatest deliberative body in the world. Former President James Buchanan called the Senate the greatest deliberative body in the world, a moniker that has stuck for 150 years. But as he left Washington for the Senate's 2-week Easter recess, Senator John Kennedy, Republican Louisiana, reflecting on his inability to get a vote on even one legislative amendment in his first 15 months on the job, said something quite different. "I think it sucks. In that emperor has no clothes moment, Kennedy exposed a key reality in Washington. The greatest deliberative body in this world no longer deliberates." That sounds like a joke, but it's a serious reflection on what is becoming of the United States Senate.
They're too old and they're too white.
The United States Senate is no longer the world's greatest deliberative body, and everybody needs to quit saying it until we recover from this period of polarization and the fear of the political consequences of tough votes, said Senator Claire McCaskill, Democrat, Missouri, in her outgoing speech. And to conclude in this area, to say that our politics is not healthy is somewhat of an understatement, said Senator Flake, who served in the House of Representatives for 12 years before his election to the Senate in 2012. He's also outgoing. "I believe that we all know well that this is not a normal time, and that the threats to our democracy from within and without are real, and none of us can say with confidence how the situation that we now find ourselves in will turn out." That is a sober statement on not only what is going on in our society today in terms of outside influence, whether it's Russia or that mystery server in Ukraine somewhere, or perhaps China getting involved at the express invitation of a member of our government. But it's also a sober commentary on what we're doing to ourselves. Now, I am, I guess, too old, and in some ways that's good, in some ways I regret it. I do, as they say, old people say this, I remember a time. Oh, gosh.
Once upon a time.
I remember a time when I wanted to be a politician, when I wanted to be a congressman. I went to the Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers.
Really?
As
Okay.
an undergraduate associate's program.
Okay. That's
And,
cool.
There were two of us there who were determined to be the first Jewish senators from New Jersey. And we have a call, so we'll finish that little story in a moment. And let's see, we got Eddie on line 1. Hello, Eddie. How can I help you?
Yeah. Good morning, guys. How's everybody?
Everybody's good.
All right. My question is, can someone obtain a copy of your text messages?
If they have a subpoena, yes.
Okay. And how would they get,
How would they get it? Was that your question? Are you still there?
Eddie, you still there?
All right, maybe Eddie will call back, but Eddie asked, can somebody get a copy of your text messages? And I said, yes, through a subpoena. And I think he was about to say, how? Well, most of the major services do keep copies of what is going on and off through the cloud for a certain period of time. They don't keep them indefinitely. Maybe 30 days, it may be 60. But if a subpoena is issued within the right time frame and those messages are still available, then yes, any law enforcement agency that has a proper subpoena or a warrant can obtain those text messages.
What would it take to get that subpoena?
Well, it all depends upon what the accusation is. For example, if there's an accusation that you've been having conversations with underage girls and a warrant is obtained, it may be obtained for an analysis of your phone, your tablet, your computer, that they can go look and see what's on there, whether it's photos or conversations on some of these apps that exist, or text messages, to try to determine whether or not they can gain additional evidence to prove their case. That's one example. If you've been accused of treason, I have no doubt that the court would issue a subpoena for your messages. I'm sure in that situation you wouldn't have to be the one to comply, because first there'd be a search warrant and they would have grabbed all this stuff from you before you had a chance to even play games with it.
Now, can a city police department do this, or is this just a federal thing?
Oh, no, I think it's state or federal, as long as a judge issues a subpoena.
Okay.
Now, of course, that subpoena can be challenged on appeal. But as long as there is a valid subpoena or a valid search warrant, if the material still exists within the provider, the third-party provider, I think they can go to that provider. They could certainly go after, your electronic devices. But yeah, those things are available. And look, there have been people clearly that have been caught up with text messages. We see it going right now. Right now within the context, and I'm not even trying to comment one way or the other on the impeachment right now, but we've seen reported text messages back and forth between Lev Parnas and whomever.
Sure.
These things come out because, they wanted them to come out, voluntarily made them available. But equally, since they clearly existed, if somebody had the appropriate warrant or subpoena, they could have gotten them in that fashion.
Interesting. I saw a story with Tulsi Gabbard, and she has been trying to serve
Hillary Clinton
Hillary
for an $80 million defamation lawsuit.
Who has skipped process servers.
No, she's just doing what a lot of people do. She is making it very difficult to get herself served.
She's moving around. She's doing.
I mean, the Secret Service stopped the process servers at her home, wouldn't let them in. Well,
I could see that.
I used to serve process too when I was in college, so I know how it is when people want to avoid and the things you have to do. Eventually, Hillary will be served. The lawsuit to me seems absurd. It's about that fact that Hillary accused Gabbard of being a Soviet agent. So she's suing for defamation, which means that if truth is the defense, theoretically Hillary has to prove that Gabbard is a Soviet agent. But that's really not the way it works when you're a public figure.
There you go. I was just going to ask you
And in the political context, discourse in the political context. First of all, as a public figure, the standard of proof is much higher for the plaintiff to prevail, and the defendant doesn't have to prove truth. Essentially, the defendant has to prove that it has to be proven, that the defendant, in this case Hillary Clinton, absolutely knew that she wasn't a Soviet agent. How are you going to prove that? Or that she acted with reckless disregard of the truth or falsity of the statement. Reckless disregard. So it's a high level. If there is any evidence, circumstantial, that Gabbard is somehow being controlled or puppeted by the Russians, just like there's been said about President Trump, you're probably not going to win that lawsuit. It's more, I think, a publicity gimmick. The other thing is, it's even higher in the political context. The First Amendment is so strong in encouraging political discourse that, truthfully, almost anything goes. I mean, we've heard outlandish claims about politicians, and they're not sued just because winning that case is next to impossible.
All right, we've seen some just horrific television spots about various politicians.
Oh, absolutely. Most of them are so over the edge, you can't tell truth from fiction.
Okay, so that seems so ridiculous that the other party in that can't sue. I mean, obviously.
But they're public figures in a political campaign, and the standards for defamation, libel, slander, in that context are just so high that most people don't even bother to sue. They accept it as the price of doing business, which is why the burden is so high.
Wow.
Remember, the framers viewed, and this is when we were, a smaller nation, and where information was obtained basically by going to the public square and hearing people speak. It's not what it is today. But the concept, we've heard so much in this trial about the framers' intent. In this regard, in the First Amendment, the framers' intent was that the marketplace of ideas be the determinant of truth and falsity. That by allowing people to speak freely, in general, society would recognize truth and determine truth and separate it from falsity. Now, that is more difficult today. It's a lot easier to be deceptive. It's a lot easier to cut spots in a way that is deceptive, something which was not capable back then because there were no spots to cut.
Sure.
But conceptually, the idea of the marketplace, the concept of the marketplace ideas is a good one. And while you may have to maybe modify it in light of modern day realities in terms of general discourse, normal defamation suits, which I handle all the time, I do believe that when it comes to political discourse, and when you're talking about somebody who is chosen to put themselves in front of the public to run for office, that almost anything goes. Now, if it can be shown that you intentionally spoke falsely, knowing that it was false, I'm in full agreement that I think a defamation suit should still be allowed to prevail and, win. But, there's a price to be paid for even doing the suing in that context. That's why most politicians won't sue for defamation. First of all, it puts the focus on that instead of something else. And second of all, it gives the defendant the opportunity to say everything they can say to try to prove it. Who wants that?
Yeah.
So there's law and there's practicality.
What about term limits? I mean, wouldn't 3 terms in the Senate be long enough?
All right. First of all, I can understand the attractiveness of that concept. And I do understand that the public over the last couple decades is growing more and more in favor of term limits for Congress, for Senate. I still resist it personally. There are a lot of good reasons for it. Don't let them become a career. Don't let lobbyists be able to have them for 20 years.
Right.
Lots of great reasons for term limits. But here's, in my view, the most significant reason against it. You're assuming that people are bad, and by doing that, you are taking away from that deliberative body, whether it's the House or the Senate, those people who go into this truly for public service and who gain an institutional knowledge over 10, 20, 30 years that works to the benefit of the country, particularly in trying to decide the most complicated of issues that come up term after term after term. Instead of starting all over, they have a reservoir of knowledge, a reservoir of what they have tried previously, a reservoir of what was close to being successful and what may need to be tinkered with a little bit, instead of starting all over. For every person that anybody can come up with as a great reason for term limits, and to which I probably would agree, they represent a great reason for term limits. What about people like Kennedy? You really want to kick him out of the Senate for as long as he was in? What about McCain? McCain was not consistent with my politics. But, we did a whole show on how much respect I and most everybody else had for him.
Sure.
Do you really want to limit him to 1, 2, or 3 terms? If that's where he wants to spend his career, if that's how he wants to give back to the public, do we really want to say you can't do that? There are so many of our representatives and senators who truly are good people, who truly do try to do the right thing. Maybe not always. Maybe they tend to vote Democrat or Republican because of party. And that happens a lot more often now than it did 20 or 30 years ago. And I wish we could go back.
There used to be a lot more independence.
Absolutely. And that's why there was a lot more bipartisanship, because they would work together. They would lunch together in the Senate or the House dining rooms. They would go out for a drink afterwards.
Well, even Tip O'Neill would.
That's right.
Go over with Reagan.
There are attorneys with whom, when something's over, I'll go out and have a bite with or have a drink with. I have no problem. Whether I've won or whether I've lost an argument, I have no problem with it. Then there are those, even if I win, I just want to get in the dang elevator, get the heck out of that place. I don't want to look that person in the face one more second than I have to. I despise them. Okay. That's the way it is. But I'm not trying to negotiate a treaty with this person. I'm arguing for a client, and they're arguing for a client. In our Congress, there are a lot of big, important things that need to be done domestically and internationally. And I think to strip away the reservoir of knowledge and experience would do a greater disservice to us than imposing term limits to try to prevent those who really shouldn't stay there too long from staying there. There's another way to deal with this. Vote them out.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Don't like it, vote them out.
But I think, didn't the original framers, they never looked at these as lifelong jobs.
No, they looked at it as citizen legislators.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
They did. I can see that. But they put no term limit in the Constitution except for the president. Because they were fearful of the executive who would become king. Now, again, I'm
Name one.
340-1590. This is the problem now.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, look, we know, perhaps today even, today it's possible that Donald Trump will be acquitted in the Senate if they reject witnesses. Okay? Next week, he's giving the State of the Union. If he's acquitted today, he's going to come in crowing next week.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
You won't have to wait till next
the
week.
The Republicans don't want him to deliver the State of the Union with the trial still going on because it's uncomfortable. But we all know, okay, he's going to be acquitted. I've known that forever, okay? He's going to be acquitted. Doesn't mean he's not guilty, because, and even in criminal court, folks, not guilty doesn't mean you're innocent. Not guilty means the state has not proven your guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So when he is acquitted, as he will be in the Senate, it doesn't mean he didn't do these things. It just means he can get away with them. And that he will probably continue to get away with them. He will continue to oppose the Congress. He will continue to enhance the power of the strong executive and the weak legislative. And we have gone in history with us having a strong legislative and a weak executive, a strong executive and a weak legislative. And both of them have tried, for the most part, to exert the power to maintain an equilibrium between the two bodies, which is really what it's supposed to be. But, you know, if he goes free, then he has about 6 or 7 or 8 months to almost do whatever he wants, because what's anybody going to do? And, hey, look, you know, I'm not blind. If he happens to be reelected, God save the United States of America, in my view. Because I don't see another effort to impeach him. I really don't. And that means 4 years of him being able to do whatever he thinks he can do. And truly, I know there's a whole bunch of you out there that completely disagree with me. I see the comments and some things on Facebook when I make a comment. You know, I believe that our institutions will be irreparably damaged after another 4 years. The First Amendment will be irreparably harmed. Balance between Congress and the executive. You know, right now it could be repaired. It could be repaired relatively simple. Our standing in the world could be repaired. Alliances can be repaired. You know, the faith in the United States standing behind its word can be repaired. After another 4 years, if we elected him again, I don't know. I think if NATO still existed, the German chancellor, you know, the French president might, for decades, be much more important than the American president. And so goes the leader of the free world concept, because we won't be anymore. And, you know, that's sort of a political diatribe based upon your question, which prohibited me from moving on.
I'll take the blame.
Again, folks, 340-1590. If you want to ask a question about a lawsuit, think you might have a claim, somebody's threatening you, or you want to bash my head in over politics, it's okay. I'm not like Rush. I won't just hang up on you.
So, okay, back to this Hillary thing.
All right.
Will the Secret Service ever allow a process?
She will get served. She'll be at some event, and she will get served. And at some point, she will.
But she still has Secret Service people.
She will permit herself to be served. I mean, you know, nobody evades service forever. Process servers can get very creative, and at that level, it's not just the average process server. They'll find a way.
That's where you become
even if they rush the stage and throw it at her, because all it has to do is touch her.
Oh.
She doesn't have to accept it. It just has to touch her body. Crumple it up in a ball, throw it at her, hit her. The Secret Service will tackle you. That's about it. They'll arrest you, but you'll get released, you know, because you were trying to serve process. It's a legitimate effort, and it's the only way you could do it. Not going to go to jail for battery for throwing a crumpled up piece of paper and having it hit her, and turns out it's a summons.
Did you ever have any weird instances?
Oh, God, yes. Oh, you don't want to let me get into this junk. Let me tell you a story about Newark, New Jersey.
Oh, God.
This was, let's say, 1981. And I was a junior in college, and I was working for a private investigator who also serves process. Got the job because my mother knew his wife, and I became one of his most reliable people because I showed up. And he sent me to serve a summons and complaint in Newark. And so I pull out my paper map, folding it in 5,000 different directions, trying to find the right area and figure out where I'm going to get where I'm going. I couldn't pull out my phone and Google it. There were no such things.
Not back then.
And I'm what you do is you drive close to the area. You pull over, go into a gas station. Can you tell me where? And they tell you 18 lights, but you make it to 2 of them, go into another gas station or stop somebody. All right. So finally, I'm in an area of Newark, which could best be referred to as the projects. A lot of high-rise buildings, not very nice. And I'm driving back and forth slowly, trying to find the numbers on a building that would show me the address of which building it is I'm trying to go to. And a Newark cop drives by and flags me down. Comes over to my window, and he says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm here to serve a summons and complaint." But remember, now I'm dressed in a suit and tie. So, I don't,
Oh, that's another giveaway.
I don't look like a ruffian. And I have a briefcase. And he wanted verification, so I showed him. And he said, "Well, do you have a gun?" That was the first time I'd ever been asked that question. And I was a little bit taken aback. I've never touched a gun in my life, folks. And I said to him, "No." And he says, "Well, I would not go in there without a gun." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, for somebody that looks like you, it's not very safe." So I did the logical thing. I said, "Well, I need to serve the summons and complaint. Would you escort me?" "No." And he got into his patrol car and left. So I drove to the next gas station, went to the payphone, called my office collect, said, "I'm not serving this thing. You're going to have to send somebody else back with a little bit more of a tan." And I told him what happened, and my boss gave me a little bit of grief, but accepted the fact that I refuse now to go into that building to try to serve process.
Probably very smart on your point there.
Now, do you want to hear about the time I tried to serve a witch?
All right. This has got to be great. Okay. Go.
All right. I'm in the Princeton area.
Uh-huh. No, well.
And I'm assigned to go somewhere, again, to serve, either a subpoena or a summons. I don't remember. And this is like in some housing development that is very fancy, big giant houses on big plots of land. I don't remember where it was, but it was out of the way, in the woods. And I finally find the right house, and it starts to flurry. Now, a snowstorm was expected. And one of the things is this was going to be my last stop because I'd already told him I need to get home before the snow really starts coming down. And now the flurries have started. And I walk up to the front door. Knock, knock, knock. No answer. Ring the doorbell. No answer. Knock a bit louder. No answer. Now these doors, the doors, front doors, that you have to sort of get on your tippy toes and you can look in a window.
Sure.
So I'm 6'2". I got a little bit on my tippy toes, and I looked through the window. And there was a hallway, and then down that hallway looked like what was a living room. And in that living room was a rocking chair. I could see a person with the back to me, rocking, back and forth, back and forth. And I knock even louder. And there is no movement. And I don't know, maybe it was the fact that it was cold. I was in the middle of a forest. The flurries were starting. I just felt that all this knocking and there not being even a movement from this body scared the living bejesus out of me. And I went to a phone and I called my boss and I said, I don't know. I think there's a witch that lives here and I am not going back. So I went home.
That was it?
That was it.
Oh, man.
I know you were looking for something a little bit more.
Well,
but
yeah.
It just freaked me out. I saw somebody in that house, and it wasn't like they were just avoiding me. It's like they didn't hear me.
Or were they still alive?
Well, I don't know. The chair was rocking back and forth.
Wow.
So I just wanted, it's remote. It's like Hansel and Gretel. I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as I could. I think I ran back to my car.
That's funny. That is so funny.
And then there was a time I got locked in a bank. I had to call the police.
You're already in.
Come on.
We had
Did
keys.
you grab any bucks? Come on.
No. We also delivered stuff, and banks needed bags delivered in the morning of paperwork, and bags picked up in the evening, and generally you would do the pickups after hours. So this private detective that I worked for had the keys to a good number of banks.
Really?
And when I was assigned to drop off 3-4 bags, I would get the keys to the bank. I'd be told what the code was. That doesn't get me into the actual bank. It gets me into the front door, like where there's an ATM machine, and it doesn't get me into the next part, which would get me into the bank. And what I was supposed to do is I drop the bags there, so that when they come to open the bank, they see the bags and they do what they're supposed to do. They take them in.
They're waiting for him.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I go to this one bank, again in New Jersey, and I get in, and I guess I must have not had the code right. Because the alarm goes off, the door is locked behind me,
Oh, no. Oh,
I'm
no.
stuck in there with the keys to the bank, but I can't get out. Apparently I can only get in. No phone, of course.
No?
So I wait. And sure enough, police cars with sirens start pulling up to this bank. And I'm just standing there, again, in a suit and tie, though, which sort of gives you a little bit,
unusual.
Either I'm the
right?
gentleman robber or it gives you a little bit more credibility. And, I have like a card that I'm holding up for them as they're coming, just so that, again, don't treat me like the average criminal. I mean, they come in, they don't tell me, hands up, or they see I'm in a suit, tie, a briefcase. I have a card. They say, what are you doing here? And I explain. They make a phone call. They verify it. They let me leave. But I was locked in that bank.
So how did they get in?
How did the police get in?
Yeah, I mean.
The police are given keys to
Gotcha. Okay.
those types of institutions within their jurisdiction.
Okay. All
in
right.
the event they have to use them. I think the bank would rather that than have them break in.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
That's
they
funny.
came in and they let me out. Now, that one, of course, my boss was pissed.
I'll bet. Big time.
Because, of course, the bank had to be called, and it was a whole big hullabaloo, and it was my fault. The other two were just funny instances. This one, he was pissed. But I maintained my job at that place, unlike a lot of other people, because I'd argue back with him. I've never been a yes man. And if he wanted to come at me, I was going to come right back at him. And the only thing, what could happen? What's the worst that could happen to me? I'm in a part-time job. Fire me. I'll find another one. But he never would. And one day I learned, I don't know if my mother's watching, I think she is. My mother told me that through this guy's wife, she knew that he had the utmost of respect for me because I was the only one who would stand up to him.
Okay, I get that.
And you want to know something? This in part forms my philosophy about a lot of things. Something I've tried to explain to Aaron. So we're not going to get into why you don't quit. And I think last week I said we were going to get into that. Don't be a yes man. Now, there are plenty of people who want yes men. And if you're not a yes man, you may get fired. And I guess if you know you're with a yes man and you want to keep that job, be a yes man. Like if you're working for Trump. But my philosophy is you stand up, you say what needs to be said, and if you have a good boss or a good spouse or a good whatever, you're not going to get in trouble for standing up to somebody and asserting yourself. Now, the way you do it is important, but the mere fact of trying to give another perspective or to disagree, to give advice, to not say what the person is expecting to hear, I think most people would do better to listen to those people because you might learn something. Now, I know when I worked, I've had my own firm now for about 13 years. And my mother says, yes, she is watching. On Facebook, folks, if you're wondering why I'm saying watching on a radio show. I'm not stupid.
She could be watching our YouTube channel. Yeah.
Well, that doesn't come until a couple of days.
A little bit later. Yeah.
All right, so what was I just saying? Oh, my prior job. I was working with one other attorney, and I worked with him for over a decade. And one of the great things I have learned about that job, and the one thing I really miss, is he'd come into my office and talk to me about cases that he was predominantly working on. And I, not knowing the case all that well, would hear what he's telling me, and I'd give him opinions, perspectives, strategy ideas, and very often I never thought of that. And it was a benefit to him. And I would go into his office on cases that I was predominantly working on. And say, I'm about to do this. I think this is the way to handle it. And he'd say, well, did you think of, or what about? And I get a new perspective from somebody who wasn't intimately involved into the forest. They'd see the forest from the trees. I was blinded now to the big picture. Or he was blinded to the big picture. And those opportunities to bounce something off of somebody else were essential and valuable. And if I had been a yes man, maybe he never would have gotten some ideas on cases that helped him go down a better path. Now, he's my boss, so he's not going to be a yes man to me. But, if you didn't give a darn and just, whatever you want, I might not have perceived other alternatives in different cases to go down better paths.
But aren't most real successful people like that?
Yes, people?
No,
I think most real successful people want to gather around them people who will challenge them in a proper manner.
Yeah.
And then when they're told what to do, even if it's not what they suggested, they implement the boss's policy. And this is what a presidential cabinet is really supposed to be. You're supposed to argue with the president in the appropriate venue, a cabinet meeting, what have you. And then when policy is decided, if it's contrary to your view, if you don't view it as illegal, then you keep quiet and you take the boss's line, in that case the president's line, and you follow policy. and you advocate it. I mean, in our history, do we think vice presidents really always agree with the president? But if they're ruled down, if they're not agreed with, and the president sends them to Georgia to advocate a policy that they don't agree with, they go and they advocate the policy, and that's their job. And if advocating that policy is so much of an anathema to them that they can't do it, then you quit. And cabinet officials have quit for precisely that reason. And ordinary people quit for precisely that reason. You know, it doesn't say that just because you disagree, you get to get your way. But I think most successful people like that challenge and appreciate it. And I have been around a number of people who have appreciated the fact that I would stand up. And I know we only have 2 minutes, so in a very quick second, I'll do this story really quickly. My first case, I think I talked about this once a year or 2 years ago. I was at a trial. I'm a second-year law student. On my right is this partner I've been working with. In the center is this big man that I've never dealt with and is the campaign chairman for the Walter Mondale for President campaign. And the guy I'm working with forgets to ask some questions that I thought he was going to ask because it was an assignment he gave me. And I have to make an instant decision. Do I sit quiet and ask about it at a break? Or do I lean in front of the chairman of the Walter Mondale for President campaign, who's a senior partner of the firm and has the power to instantly fire me, and whisper over to my partner, what about, well, we all know what I did, right? You can all guess. I leaned over in front of this big shot guy, and I whispered to my partner, not my partner, but the partner I worked with. He had forgotten something. He jumped up and, a few more questions, Judge. It turned out to be important, and everybody appreciated it. I wasn't fired. I was asked to come back next year. Could have gone very differently.
Very cool, though.
But, you know, you got to do what you got to do. Okay, folks. We'll try to get into some real law next week. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and a very nice week. And thank you for all of you who have called over the 2 years. I've enjoyed these 2 years at WPSL, and I'm looking forward to year 3 with WPSL and WSTU. Have a great weekend and a good week. See you next Friday.
You've been listening to Ask a Lawyer right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie, WSTU Stuart, Martin County's Heritage Station.